Where are you located at also?
In New Jersey. I'm actually not that far from Fort Dix,
Okay.
McGuire, Fort Dix. Yeah, yeah.
All right. How's the weather in Jersey right now?
Terrible. It's been raining for three
Really?
days. It's not super cold, but it's terrible. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Alabama does not feel like December. Does not feel like it at all.
Well, global warming. So it's
Yeah.
like when I was a kid, this time of year it'd be snowing, but it's raining. So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I got up this morning like at 4 o'clock and I walked outside and I was like, I gotta get a jacket and get this, that. And I walked outside and it was like 70 degrees. I was like, this
yeah,
is not,
crazy. Shouldn't be
yeah,
that. Yeah,
not right.
yeah,
So you are a life designer, a
yeah,
speaker, founder, CEO of Consonate, is
yeah,
consonate.world, right?
yeah. Yep, nailed it.
What is Consonate?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of a step back. My
Okay.
background is so I grew up in a ultra fundamentalist, conservative Christian, evangelical Christian household. It also happened to be an excessively abusive household. Unfortunately, those things seem to go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
I essentially grew up in a cult. I went to school there, I went to church there, spent most of my time there. And throughout my life, I just recognized the power that I needed to feel like my surroundings were reflecting me authentically, right? Like I didn't feel like I had any control over anything, but I like crafted my bedroom to be this place that was my sanctuary. I wasn't allowed a lock on the door. I wasn't allowed any of those things, but like I could close the door, and sometimes my father would allow me to close the door and just like be there and listen to music and create an environment. I used to use the walls like a vision board, and something clicked inside of me that helped me to like recognize when something really terrible would happen, that I would rearrange my life. I would rearrange the furniture in my bedroom or any of, but like I would just organize something. Something in my physical environment would need to change.
Mm-hmm.
And now the language that I use is I recognized that it was like I needed to reset the stage, right? We spend 2/3 of our life inside of our home. It needs to be an authentic reflection of who we are. And in a study published in Europe in 2019, there's top three things that affect our happiness. Number one is our mental health. Number two is our home. Number three is our physical health, right? And I honestly believe that number one and two are indelibly tied together. They really should be ranked as like inseparable,
Yeah.
because our mental health and our home, they are reflections of each other. They are a cycle of one another. And so as a teenager, I started really getting curious about what interior design was like, because I recognized the power of our physical environment. So that's my background. I started off starting my business as an interior designer. I've been an interior designer for 17 years. But when I took my business full time, and originally it wasn't named Consonate, it was just like a placeholder name. SF Design is what it was called when I founded it. I didn't yet recognize the power of the way that I worked and the way that I understood space and the way that I recognized its connection to our mental health and the way that I worked with my clients. And it wasn't until like 3 or 4 years ago when a client told me, they were like, yeah, I tell everyone that you're my interior designer and my life coach. And I was like, you do? Like I had, and what's funny is I've been leading group coaching
Yeah.
around principles that I now call life design for 2.5 years. I worked with 100 people over 2.5 years
Wow.
with, so I was functioning
Mm-hmm.
as in this coaching way, but I didn't see it that way, and I wasn't charging for it. I was just looking to create connection and community and ways of us holding one another accountable, and us being able to really authentically connect and tell our stories and really be truly heard, right?
Yeah.
And to understand the world from one another's perspectives, and to understand that we are not alone and we are deeply, truly connected to one another, right?
Yeah.
Even though the world would have us think and believe and feel otherwise. Um, and so it was at that time that I rebranded my business to now what it's called Consonate, which is, it's actually a real word. It's just a defunct word. Um, and and really got clear on the fact that yes, my interior design work was important to me, but what was more important to me was the recognition that there was a larger conversation that needed to be had, so that we understand that the rules only apply to us if we say they do,
Yeah.
right? I'm not talking about laws, although those need some changing
Mm-hmm.
too. Lots of changing. What I mean is rules, right? Lots of people like to put rules on us based on their fears and their perspective of the world, and their rules have nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
They have no authority unless we give it to them. But we have to learn to be embodied within ourselves so that we can say, I understand your rules and I understand where they're coming from, but they're not my rules. And I'm going to live my life according to my rules. And we can do that with grace and kindness. And we can truly lean into one another and try to understand one another better rather than like pushing further away from each other, which is not doing us any good.
Have you dabbled in emotional intelligence any?
Oh, of course. Of course.
Oh,
Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. I've studied psychology as an amateur um, since college.
yeah.
And I toyed with the idea of either becoming a psychologist, a lawyer, or an engineer. And then I studied on interior design. Um, and I think it just came back to like understanding, like I said, understanding the power of our physical environment. But because of the way that I understand the power of our physical environment,
Yeah.
psychology and interior design are indelibly tied to me, because I'm elbow deep in people's homes, right?
Hmm.
Like when I worked in the corporate world, I did offices primarily for a decade. And then when I started my own business, I focused on residential. So I'm literally elbow deep in people's lives. And the thing that I tell people when they reach out to me if they want me to do interior design work with them specifically is don't clean your house.
You're
Right. I
probably
want
having
to
a, you're going crazy looking at my background, probably.
no, it's fine. I go and I don't want people to clean their house. I don't want them to organize. I want to see the way that they're functioning in their house currently,
Hmm.
what's not working,
Yeah.
what they're using, what they're not using. I can see where the dust is, where it isn't. When I say don't clean, I mean don't clean. And then people are like, you're going to judge me. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I need that information. I need to know the way that your home is not supporting you
Yeah.
so that we can create an environment that is supporting you.
So I'm gonna try to speak to this, but I don't
Oh,
speak interior design language. So I'll try my best. But I remember when I was younger, my mother would constantly rearrange the house, and always it'd be like a Saturday morning. It would be, we're going to rearrange the bedrooms and we're going to
yeah,
rearrange the living room. And
yeah,
uh, when we got done, she's like, oh, it just feels so much better. It just feels,
yeah,
I feel more at peace. I was stressed out with the way it was previously. And it was something that I started doing, I guess, subconsciously. The older I got, I would start, especially when I was living on my own in an apartment, I'd move stuff
yeah,
around and I'm like, ooh, I like this where it
yeah,
is now. And I never really put two and two together that, that's it's really an energy thing. And when
yeah.
and when
We
I
grow
started,
and change, and so should our environment.
yeah, and even here with this house, like I love this house, but it's not something I want to live in forever, especially
Yeah,
being military and PCS.
yeah,
But when COVID hit and people were confined in their quarters for however long it was,
mm-hmm.
people were not happy with their environment.
Yeah,
And it wasn't until recently on an episode I talked to Jeremy Kubicek, author of new book Peace Index, and one of his different components of having full internal peace is your environment and where you live. And he said, you got to factor in the top 5 places you spend the most time.
yes,
How are you in those areas? And
yeah,
yeah, I totally agree with you
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
It's crazy that's it's starting to rear its head in a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, and it's something that I've been like preaching like from the rooftops since I was like a teenager, but
Yeah.
people were like, "Yeah, I understand what you mean." And I'm like, "But do you? Do you?" And then the pandemic hit and suddenly, although people don't have the language that I'm using, right?
Hmm.
They suddenly felt it in their bones that their
Yeah.
home did not support them. There was areas on their home set up that they almost never used that suddenly they needed to create use, they needed to use, right, but weren't set up to support that use, so they had to scramble to set it up to create that use. What I say to people all the time is it is your home and no one else has any say over it. So if you have a formal dining room and you never flip and use it, or you use it once or twice a year, well then pack up the table and chairs, sell them, give them away, and set it up. It should be every space in your immediate home, right? Like, your bedroom, so on and so forth. Those you're using, for 8 hours a day, and they have a very specific use. But all the other spaces, there's no rules that say that you should give any shit about.
Yeah.
That say that you can't turn your dining room into a yoga studio or your living room, into an art studio, like whatever it is that brings you joy, that you do the most of by yourself, with your family, whatever it is, that's what that space should be.
Hmm.
It should function to support you, not to support societal expectations,
Yeah.
because those are bullshit.
Yeah. I could have turned this office into having like a globe on the wall and a map and
Yeah.
quotes. And I was like, it's going to fit my personality and my wife's personality
Yeah.
because we're going to be
Clearly
living.
you like horror movies.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I do.
I mean,
A
I
lot.
was like, oh, those are all horror movie
This is
posters.
so this is like the horror section. I
Yeah.
have the Batman section.
Uh,
It's varied.
yeah.
Each
Yeah.
wall
Yeah.
has its own theme though. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, that's I mean, super beneficial. I think more people need to put more stock into that and
Yeah.
definitely what Concinnate.world, correct?
Yeah. That's absolutely, yeah, that's the website. There's what I focus on now is my public speaking workshops, and then I kick off group coaching,
Yeah.
2 new sessions in January. So all that information is on there. And I really emphasize the group coaching. Yes, you can hire me for one-on-one coaching, but
Hmm.
I keep that limited to people doing like just a couple of sessions with me.
Yeah.
Group coaching is where the power happens, because that's where connection happens. Each one of us hears information different ways, right?
Yeah.
I can say exactly the same thing and 12 different people will hear it 12 different ways. The power of group coaching is that all those 12 people are in the same room, and then we're having a conversation about how we're interpreting what we're hearing, so
Yeah.
that we can hear everybody's interpretation, and then we're gleaning extra information and we're learning more about each other and each other's experiences. And then suddenly, when someone felt so far away, suddenly we're like, actually, they're a lot more like me than I thought. And
Hmm.
I'm a lot more like them than I thought. And there's a lot more we have in common. And that's where community starts to form.
Yeah.
And that's where deep connection starts to be. And that's where joy is found. So
Yeah.
I have a massive passion, and I keep it really affordable. It's like $90 per month per person. Um, and that's, we meet every week. So my goal is always to make it accessible,
Yeah.
so that as many people can be a part of it as possible, because there's so much power in it.
I'm gonna have to talk to you offline about it.
And
You're speaking my language now, like bridging the gap between what
yeah,
people's intentions versus the impact and stuff.
yeah,
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 it's really, really important. And I'm glad to see a lot more, not just, military, but I've been doing EQ and
yeah,
five voices, 5 gears, and I've worked with
yeah,
USAA and all sorts of places. It's good to see people are actually
yeah,
taking
yeah,
on that.
yeah. Have you read any of Malcolm Gladwell's work?
Yeah.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. It's like the OG of EQ.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I usually once a year I reread his books, or
Hmm.
like can't wait till a new one comes out, because I adore his perspective on
Yeah.
things. Um, and definitely talking to strangers. I like cried through that like entire book. Like
That's
entire book.
Yeah, that's a really good, and it starts off so strong too.
So strong. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I was like renovating a client's bathroom, right? Because they wanted me to do the renovation work. P.S. I'm very handy. So I'm like doing the renovation work myself, and I'm like listening to this book and I'm like sobbing. They're like, they come in, they're like knocking, they're like, are you okay? I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I'm not okay. This book is wrecking me. I am wrecked,
It's a
but in
deep
the
book.
best way. Yeah. But
I've had several guests say it's their favorite book.
one of my favorites. Absolutely one of my
Oh,
favorites. Yeah.
what? All right, let me ask you this. We already
Sure.
said that one. So the books we've already mentioned are off the table.
Mhm.
What is a go-to book for somebody?
Okay, so recent things. I actually just redid my workshop workbook, because I'm doing one for a local, really prominent chamber of commerce in January. And I put together a list of like reading material that are like really important. And I just happen to have the printed version right here. So
Oh,
I'll read
nice.
off some of the books that
You're
are.
like the most prepared in any guest I've ever had for a book recommendation.
Yay. Okay. So a good place to start for emotional intelligence, I would say, would be Water, My Friends by Shannon Lee. Her
Okay.
father was Jet Li.
Yep. That recently came out a couple months ago.
Yeah, I read last year, I think. I read
Was it?
that. I read it almost as soon as it came out, because I really wanted to hear her perspective. Rebel Talent by Francesca Gino. That's not as much specifically focused on emotional intelligence, but it's kind of the undercurrent.
Hmm.
It's about, um, in our society, we've become too singularly focused, too specialized, and it
Hmm.
is actually serving to separate us from one another and to separate us from our authentic selves. So it's really beautiful the way that she talks about us having more being generalists than specialists is
Mm.
actually beneficial because it gives us a deeper understanding of actually how to be successful and how to create community and how that benefits all of us. I also love Give and Take by Adam Grant. Love that one. That's not on this list, but that like is one of my favorites. And then I have both The Tipping Point and Blink from Malcolm Gladwell on here.
Blink's good.
Yeah. And then also there is a book that I just finished reading literally this morning, How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong. Deeply impactful about how to create community, what it looks like to resolve conflict in new and different ways, so on and so forth. And then there is an article. It's I think his name is Norgren something. He it's if you Google like relationship anarchy,
Hmm.
it is it is a very impactful like statement of how we can reorganize relationship with both ourselves and the people around us. It's kind of just like a
Oh,
short read. Yeah.
it's a pretty good list. Have,
I
have
read
you
a
read
lot. I
have
read a
you
lot.
read EQ 2.0, Travis Bradberry?
No, not yet. No.
That's a good one. And it starts off, it's one of those, if you catch me right off the
Yeah.
beginning of the book, almost like a,
Yeah.
a television series.
Yeah.
He starts off with a story about a shark, and it's how someone escaped a shark attack,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
EQ tied into it. And then Buddha and the Badass.
I haven't read that one either. Did you read the Book of Joy
Mm-mm.
by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu?
Someone told me to read it.
Really good.
And yeah,
Really good.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
These are
I have to
all,
be honest, I focus on reading books written by marginalized communities
yeah,
about emotional intelligence.
yeah,
So I do avoid reading an overabundance of books written by cishet white men
yeah,
simply because I recognize there's an element of privilege there that they may or may not actually recognize fully themselves. And so
yeah.
I'm really interested in, I say this to people all the time, and I say this with deep sadness, is that we talk about the Black community and we talk about the brown community, but no one ever says the white community because there is no community in whiteness.
Mm.
We have eradicated true community and connection. And so for me, I'm more invested in understanding what does community actually look like when you look at indigenous communities and you look at there's deep, authentic
Oh yeah.
community that we have tried to eradicate over and over again. And so my focus is typically on books written by marginalized communities.
With that being said, check out Buddha and the Badass.
Yeah, I
Definitely go.
definitely will. Yeah.
Chapter one, you stay on chapter one forever. It's so deep. It's get you doing so much
Yeah.
reflective thinking.
Yeah.
So now, okay, so did things a little bit different with this conversation where I
Yeah.
kind of started off. I liked it, but now I like to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me about your upbringings. Like, where were you born? What was family? What?
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up in South Jersey. Um, and I grew up not that far from a military base. So like there's lots of people who like off the base living,
Mhm.
lots of military or former military around. Um, and like I said, when I was 4, my parents joined a spiritual community, and then they kept joining more and more strict and conservative versions.
Yeah.
Both my parents, I mean, here's the reality is that I've never met a single person who perpetrates harm against others who hasn't had harm perpetrated against them.
Hurt
That they
people hurt
have
people.
left, yeah, that they've left and is metastasized, and they do not recognize that they have in fact become the harmer
Yeah.
because they're still justifying their behavior because they were harmed,
Hmm.
right? And I say that not as in like I have to keep that in check in my own life, right? Because I have been harmed many times. So like trigger warning, TMI for those people who might be listening. My very first memory is of sexual assault. I was 3 years old by my babysitter's son. So when hurt people also surround themselves with other hurt people, right?
Hmm.
And so who my parents could afford to have watch me were other hurt people. And so my babysitter's son, his father, my babysitter's husband was an alcoholic and he was abusive. And so of course their son absorbed that. And when he sexually assaulted me, he was only 10 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this is why my work is so important to me, because I know intimately the depth of harm
Yeah.
that happens. A 10-year-old has to live for the rest of his life with the knowledge that he sexually assaulted a child, a toddler,
Yeah.
right? And I have no idea whatever happened to him, but I still think about him sometimes and wonder if he's okay. Um, then at 12, I was forced to take a chastity pledge, a virginity pledge, in front of my 2,500 person church by my father. And then he spent the next 3 years grooming me and sexually assaulted me when I was 15.
Oh my gosh.
Um, I have complex PTSD.
Yeah.
That's a reality I only became truly aware of. I knew I had trauma. I didn't realize it was complex PTSD. And I, until 3 years ago, when I was like talking with a therapist, and she was like, "So have you ever been formally diagnosed with PTSD?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "Well, you have now."
Yeah.
Um,
That's the scary thing about PTSD.
yeah.
Yeah. We
And
often
well,
talk
and
about this. It's just who I am, or it's just,
right. But it does become just who
yeah.
you are, right? And that's the thing, it integrates it. And then I read The Body Keeps the Score two and
Mm,
a half years ago. For anyone who hasn't read it, like,
that's good.
full disclosure, you should be in therapy when you read it, because I found the first half of the book excessively triggering, because it put its finger on exactly who I was.
Yeah.
It put its finger on all these behaviors and all these things that I just thought were part of who I was. It's PTSD. It was not who I am.
Any sort of trauma, that book pinpoints it.
Correct. And
Yeah.
because my trauma started so young,
Hmm.
my PTSD is rooted as a 3-year-old. So my entire existence as a human being, and that's the thing about CPTSD, right? Is that there is really typically very little recognition or establishment of who you were before your PTSD occurs, and it rewires your brain. So it also oftentimes triggers neurodivergence, meaning
Hmm.
autism, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder. I am neurodivergent, because it interrupts the normal growth process of your brain, so on and so forth. So reading that book changed my life, because I suddenly recognized physical symptoms, mental symptoms, reactions, you know, all of these things. And I was like, shit, it's all PTSD. So like there's a reckoning that happens, and you're like, I don't even know who I am. Now I've got to heal, and in the process figure out who I am alongside of this PTSD, right?
How old were you when you read that?
There's that book only came out recently. So I was 35, 36.
Wow. So that's
Yeah.
crazy to think, from like 3 and 10 all the way to 36,
Yeah.
just festering. Just,
Yeah. Well, I left that religious cult when I was 25, 26, right around the time my brain's fully formed. Right. And
yeah.
then I recognized, I was like, this isn't okay. This is not safe environment. The church was made aware of what my father had done. And the exact words to my mother were, "This wouldn't have happened if you were sleeping with your husband as often as he wants."
Oh my gosh. No. Yeah.
Meanwhile, he's abusive. So of course she doesn't want to sleep with him because he's harming her. The whole thing was just completely messed up. And they should have immediately called the authorities. That's what
Yeah.
they're legally obligated to do when a
Child
child
services or something.
correct. They did none of that. They, in fact, refused to allow my mother and told her that we would be ousted, if she involved the authorities, outside of what they decided was beneficial.
So this cult, is it like everyone kind of lives offsite their own houses? Y'all just
Correct.
congregate every
Yeah,
other
and
Wednesday, Sunday?
that's the thing I think that people don't understand about abuse or about cults, is that it's not like all of a sudden you're secluded. It's psychological seclusion.
Yeah.
I'm sure people in the military can actually understand it. There's a hell of a lot that goes on with psychological seclusion. That
Hmm.
people can grip into your mind, and you can become very easily manipulated by fear. That's how cults, and that's how extremist ideology thrives, is in your fear,
Yeah.
right? And in secluding you or making you afraid of new information that would actually help you to leave, right?
Hmm.
Making everything the monster, but really they're the monster.
Social media can be viewed as some sort
Correct.
of a cult in a way, in terms
Yes.
of,
Yes. Creating cult followings of certain figures, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the other thing is that people don't recognize that everyone's susceptible. You don't actually have to have grown up in a shitty environment to be susceptible to a cult, or to be
yeah.
susceptible to, extremist ideology, any of those things. It's a
Hmm.
matter of following our intuition, asking for help, being rooted in community. Like that's the thing. I think if my parents and I had a sense of community outside of that cult,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have I would have had a way to leave before then,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't, because abuse is exclusionary, right? I mean, that's the way that it thrives. So, I mean, there's a lot that I've had to work through in my life. And for a really long time, um, I still was trying to sort through, like, what are my ideals and what are these ideals that I grew up with that have just rooted themselves and I've gone along with because I felt like I had to,
Yeah.
because I felt like I was going to go to hell if I didn't, so on and so forth. I no longer believe in that, but a matter of, you know, there was just so much fear. I was just
Yeah.
trapped in so much fear and so much anguish and so much pain. As a teenager, there was many times where I literally almost took my own life. Suicidal ideology was a very, very present part of my, like, all from like 13 all the way to like 16, 17. Um, and then I became anorexic and bulimic. No shock there. Um, you know, I'm 6'1", and at one point in time, I was 150 pounds.
Wow.
I was a size 2, 4. I was like nothing but a bag of bones. I look back at pictures and I'm like, and I thought I was still fat. So it was like literally all in my
Yeah.
head. I was still trying to lose weight. And people in my life are like, how are you going to lose weight? And I was like, I have some skin on my stomach. They're like, that's all you have.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's all you have. I looked like a skeleton. But like your thoughts become so self-harming that the being hungry all the time, it becomes like your companion, right?
Yeah.
Like the pain is just so familiar that you just
Well,
live
and
in a
like I said too, your brain's still not fully
correct.
developed at that age. I mean,
Exactly.
it's just,
Exactly. Yeah. So, these are all the things where, when I started working with clients as an interior designer, I tell people I'm the keeper of my clients' stories. I know some of the things that no one else knows about them.
mhm.
And I'm good and I'm okay with that. I'm thankful that they trust me with their stories, but they intuitively know they can trust me with their story, whether I tell them anything about mine or not, because there's no judgment on my part.
Yeah.
There's just like, how can I help you? Right. I've literally walked into potential clients' homes and I've been like, can I hug you right now? Like, is that okay? Because you don't feel okay.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel okay. Are you okay? And they're like, no. And I literally, like, my first meeting with someone has been like them sobbing on my shoulder. But that's how we build community together,
Yeah.
right? We don't ignore those moments where it's like, I don't actually know you yet, but I can tell you're hurting and I can tell you need someone
Hmm.
to not ignore your hurting. And so I'm just going to be there for you, even though I don't know you yet. Right. Like,
Yeah.
because I needed someone to do that for me. So I insist on being that for someone else, which is, again, why, like, I always come back to group coaching being this powerful thing, because then we find community, we find connection with not just me as a coach, but like a whole group of people that then you can learn and share your story and be a part of. Um, I can feel truly authentically accepted,
Yeah.
right? Because by sharing our story, we learn, right? Like we learn that it's okay, like giving our story a voice, we can suddenly feel okay inside of our own selves.
Hmm.
Like it's okay. We get to take up space. Our story gets to take up space. We don't have to hide it. We don't have to be ashamed of it. None of that. We get to own it, and it's a part of us, and we get to share it. And when we bring light into a moment, suddenly we realize we're okay because there's other people there with us.
Yeah. And, everything you've said about your journey up to this point, I mean, it goes to show, it's kind of one of the reasons I enjoy doing this podcast, is that you could be at the lowest of lows
Yeah.
and then you end up succeeding and doing
Yeah.
amazing things if you
Yeah.
just endure it, get past it, keep
Yeah.
fighting. And I went through some trauma too in my life. I lost my father at 11. I lost my sister when I was
Hard.
16.
That's really
And yeah, it was tough. And for me, I'm always curious when I talk to people like you that I really didn't start. I didn't get past all that until I was, gosh, 30 some years old.
yeah.
You said you broke away, what, 17 years old is kind of when you,
17 is when I started like really rebelling, but now
right?
I don't call it rebelling because I got to the place where I recognized no authority but besides my own. But I didn't leave until I was 26 or
So
20,
you,
25 or 26.
so
Yeah.
you left at 25, 26, and
I mean, I had to stay around. I have three younger siblings, and my
yeah,
one sister looks exactly like me, and I was afraid my father was going to do the same thing to her that he did to me.
when you
So
were,
I stayed around, and I literally told him, I was like, "You ever touch her, and I'll take a baseball bat to
yeah,
her. Don't touch her."
I still have, gosh, I'm like all over the place with my questions. So
Yeah,
when you were sitting there doing your vision boards and, on
yeah.
your wall and envisioning, like, what did you think life was eventually going to turn out to? Did you see yourself doing something like you're doing now?
I had no idea what it was going to turn into. I just knew it needed to matter. I knew it needed to matter. I knew I was going to spend my life making sure that people felt seen and heard
Hmm.
because I didn't feel seen and heard, and I needed to know that I could be a part of creating a world where people could be themselves.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anyone around me whose life I wanted to emulate. And so I found books. And books literally saved my life. It's why I still read as much as I do because it provides so much perspective. It really can be the mentor in your head. They can be the friend that you wish you had.
Yeah.
You know, they are a way of seeing a world outside of the one that exists inside of our head with our narrow perspective. And so books, and I would write quotes from those books on index cards. I read C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves. It's still one of my very favorite books. I read The Four Loves like probably once every couple of months, just trying to wrap my head around what is love and do my parents love me if they're so abusive? How do I glean love from what is being done to harm me? And then how do I create separation and safety for myself? There was so much seeking, happening in my life that that honestly like ended up saving my life, right? And so for me, I've created this wellspring of wisdom inside of myself, and lots of people in my life come to me for wisdom, especially when they're trying to navigate difficult times. So,
Yeah.
like, I just learned, like, why don't I just put this all to good use,
Yeah.
right? And help more people, talking about my story, through public speaking, you know, facilitating these conversations in group coaching, and then facilitating workshops in these large corporations where I hope we can change those corporate environments to be something that's healthy instead of like eat or be eaten you
I,
know
I do like that shift. You're starting to see kind of a paradigm shift. I mean,
Yeah.
even in the military, that whole eat or be
Which I
eaten.
never thought I would say, which is
Yeah, and a lot of times it emulates what corporate America's doing, and so
yeah,
it's actually good to see that. And it's kind of what you were saying was really interesting there, where you were talking about how you were protecting your siblings, but it was kind of matching your vision of what you wanted to do.
yeah,
So it was like you were visioning it, but you were actually acting it out.
yeah.
Um, at the same time. What do you think it was? Because I know you said that your parents had past trauma. They didn't have like the tools in their
Yeah.
toolbox.
Yeah, my parents are boomers.
Okay.
They grew up, their parents are the silent generation. Their parents grew up. There is absolutely, if you look at epigenetics teaches us that trauma is stored in our DNA, right?
Hmm.
So we don't actually have to have personally experienced any trauma, but if generations before us did. So here's a quick way of like understanding,
Okay.
recognizing that as our mother's body is being formed inside of our grandmother, eggs for her future children, right, will be created inside of her body, right? So stress hormones in our grandmother's body are in her body coursing through our mother's body as our mother's body is being formed, which then means those hormones are stored and that trauma is stored inside her body. And as the eggs are being formed inside of her body that will later become us, those stress hormones are inside of her body, right? So it's forming our DNA, it's forming our body, it's forming our body's response. So our body could be in fight or flight mode from the time that we are inside of our grandmother's womb, right? Through our
Yeah.
mother's body. So we don't have to personally experience trauma. So, but even so, the silent generation, they're born into, my grandparents were both born into the Great Depression, right? And you had a mass trauma experience, right?
Oh yeah.
A societal, overwhelming trauma experience that was never really dealt with, right? Never really, there was no, at that time, They didn't see a need to go and see someone to talk about what happened, right? Because everybody dealt with the same thing. You just kind of like, no
Just
one's
tough it out.
bleeding, just tough it out, suck it up, right? Like, don't cry about it. There's nothing crying is going to, well, yeah, crying will release it from your body.
Hmm.
Crying will release those hormones from your body. Crying will help you to move it through. Dancing it out, moving your body will help to move, because trauma is literally stored in our tissue, in our
Hmm.
brain, in our body. It's literally stored there. But there was no understanding of that back then. So then you had people whose entire life experience was nothing but trauma, because the Great Depression lasted for a very long time, and that was their entire childhood. Their parents were just trying to survive, going through this survival mode, and then they raised boomers with this kind of tough it out, suck it the fuck up. You don't have it nearly as bad
And
as I
don't
had as
cry.
a kid. Correct. You don't have any right to cry because
Yeah.
I grew up in the Great Depression. You have it way better, so suck it the fuck up. And this is not a pissing contest. This is real life. These
Yeah.
are people's lives at stake. These generations at stake, but they had no understanding of that. And so, you know, for me, I think the difficulty was that my parents did the best they knew how, but the best they knew how was still harmful, right?
And
Right.
that was parenting at that time. I mean, it was not
Correct. And
not
there
to
was
that
no
extent, but
Correct, but there was no accountability.
yeah.
Even still now, my parents take no accountability. They're like, "You're alive, you're fine, you're doing great." That's not on you,
You're
though. That's on
successful, so I
me.
did something right.
I no, I'm
Yeah.
successful because of me.
Yeah.
I'm not successful because of you. And the thousands and thousands of dollars I have to spend on therapy and coaching and all of these things, I did that. You didn't do that. You were still perpetrating harm, and I had to run away from home. Right? Like
Mhm.
I left home at 25 and was just like, sayonara. you know. Um. So it's for me, it just, I think it's perpetrated because there was no understanding societally of accountability. There were systems of oppression that weren't even being discussed or talked about. You still had, women were just had earned the right to vote when the silent generation was
Mhm.
right. So there was still remnants of aggression towards women. Before then, women had no rights, right? They couldn't have bank accounts. They couldn't have. So you have these like these firm systems of oppression in place where women, like if a woman left her husband, he had the kids, she had no right to even their
Oh,
children.
even 80s and 90s. If a woman was
Correct.
the breadwinner,
Yes.
it's like, whoa, there's a
Right.
problem. Yeah.
Right. So like all of these things we're still sorting through. So back then there was a lot of shit. There was like a lot of shit, right? And so I think it's just a function of the time that they grew up and the lack of accountability, and still this. I think what I hurt for my parents, because there's this. I'm like, your lack of ability to say I did this thing, and I know it hurt you, and then to take accountability for the therapy and the so on and so forth, and to get accountability, to form community, to really truly learn how to do better, right? Because we can't learn how to do better within ourselves. If we knew how to do better, we'd do better.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we can't fix a problem we created. We need
Yeah.
help to do that. And so I think it's, continually comes in between my relationship with my family, because there is no like, hey, I fucked up, and like I'm gonna get the help that I need to make it better. I don't want apologies, right? I just want
Ownership.
ownership,
Yeah.
right? And I see that by asking them to own it, it kills them.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
my parents, like they don't want to own it, and I see it in their faces. I see it in the, I don't talk to my father really anymore for obvious reasons. But even still, when I've come across him, there's no like, because then
Remorse or
they
nothing.
it's not that there's no remorse. I think there's deep amounts of remorse, but I
Mm.
think they can't admit it out loud, because then they'd have to admit to themselves that they tried to destroy their own daughter,
Yeah.
because that's what they did.
Yeah.
Right? They continually put me in harm's way and never showed up for me when I needed them to, right? And providing food and shelter and clothing is the bare fucking minimum if you're going to choose to have children. So you can't hold me responsible for you keeping me alive. That's like a prerequisite. That's like not even the bare minimum, right? So like those are kind of thrown in my face, just like their parents put in their face, right? Because their parents didn't have food and clothing and shelter, right? The silent generation didn't have those things. So providing them for their children, like, you should be happy, you have those things, right? And so that mentality has been preserved. And it's like now we're all kind of like, whoa, that can't keep going forward. We have
Yeah.
to recognize that can't keep going forward. And so I'm deeply encouraged by this kind of shift that I see happening in our culture, where we're recognizing that these deeper conversations need to be had and accountability needs to be established, not just for the people who harmed us, but for us as people who have been harmed,
Yeah.
because we may become the harmer if we don't hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah, and I've really you talk about the shift. I've noticed there's been a shift in, we were talking about it I think before we started recording, but
Yeah.
the emotional, physical, spiritual, social.
Yeah.
I mean, with all of those, with spiritual, it just used to be, what was your religion? Now
Right.
it's internal wellness,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
I don't believe in
yoga.
religion anymore. Religion can go suck a something.
And it then we've got the one that for me, and I whenever I teach EQ or anything like that, I always talk about how out of those four, it's crazy to me because social is, we display it out for everybody. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm out eating with all these people, selfie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want likes. And then it's
Yeah.
physical. Oh my gosh, I am in the locker room at Planet Fitness. Here's my selfie.
Right.
Celebrate my physical domain.
Right. Yeah.
Spiritual.
But
It's
we're deeply disconnected.
Oh yeah, it's a book and coffee with the mountains behind you, and it's like,
Right. Right. Right.
oh my gosh, I'm so at peace. But with emotional, it's just, hey, I went and talked to someone at mental health, or hey, I have a counselor or a therapist,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh,
Friends.
what's wrong
Yeah.
with you? Even
Right.
though that's one of our, if
Yeah.
not our biggest pillar, because
Yeah.
if you're not internally, I mean,
Yeah.
you see it all the time. People have
Yeah.
a great life
Yeah.
on the outside,
Not true. It's not
and
true. None of
but
it's true.
everybody has some sort of
Yeah.
baggage and stuff. So,
Yeah.
what to you? Why do you think there's been such a shift in that emotional uh, domain of wellness and spiritual
Um,
too?
I think it's a matter of people recognizing that we are not responsible for taking on the beliefs of our previous generations, especially because the beliefs of our previous generations did so much harm
Hmm.
and are still doing harm, right? And I think we just got to the place where we recognize we are deeply, like, we are still, there's still this animal brain partially inside of us that recognizes that if we don't knock it the fuck off, if we don't get our shit together, we are going to destroy ourselves and the very planet we reside on. We
Hmm.
won't be able to continue as a species if we don't knock it the fuck off.
Yeah.
There's we are like, mental health is in the toilet. We just hit 8 billion people on the planet, yet there's more and more people starving to death every single day, right? And it's not for lack of resources, although we can't keep consuming at this rate. It's just a matter of distribution and too many people hoarding wealth. Human beings are the only people on the planet are the only beings on this planet who have to pay to live here, who have to pay to survive. The
That's
only
true.
ones. The only ones. And when we grasp that, when we truly grasp that and let that sink in, we recognize that all people deserve food and clothing and a healthy way of living and a reasonable contribution to society. We shouldn't have to kill ourselves, break our backs, and work 80 hours a week just to put food on the table.
Hmm.
Healthy food,
Yeah.
right? That should be accessible to all people. And you see countries around the world making that a reality. You see Finland has almost eradicated homelessness. You see Scotland stepping up, and Scotland has I love this, but in Scotland, even whistling at or verbally harassing a woman is considered sexual assault.
I like
They
that.
provide because it is an invasion. It is an invasion of privacy. It is an invasion of someone's personhood. And I would guess it's not just against women.
Well,
Um,
harassment leads to assault.
Correct. Yes, exactly. And what people fail to recognize is, like, also America is in the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world for women year over year. So, like,
Hmm.
every time people are like, America's the great place, I'm like, you must be a white man. Like, sorry, but you probably are. Um, and then you see a place like Scotland also, like, creating, like, when a kid is born, they get the parents get a $250 put in a bank account for that child. They get a box that's used as a crib. They get 3 months worth of clothing and diapers and formula and all of these things to help support that life being born and brought into this world,
That's
right?
thousands of dollars in the States at Walmart right there.
Right, right. But they value life, right? And they
Yeah.
value supporting the people who brought that life into this world. It's not like, hey, you have to bring that life into this world like America says now. You have to bring that life into this world, and then we're going to abandon you. And by the way, if you can't afford that child, we're going to take it from you and put it in the foster care system. And by the way, it takes 3 times as much money to put a child in the foster care system as it does to support the person who birthed them.
Mm-hmm.
3 times as much. And then we sit here and pretend like it's too expensive. No, it's not. We just trade children like commodities. We give them to wealthy people and we pay them to take care of them. There's all of these things that I think we're now becoming aware of as America, because we were taught propaganda for so long that this is the great place. And so we weren't curious about what existed outside of it. And now I think as a society, we're like, wait a second, this can't be the great place because I'm suffering and everyone I know is suffering. So there's got to be someone who's doing it better. And we're suddenly like getting curious and learning. And I think the internet has obviously spurred that on.
I love this country. I would die for this country.
I
But
do
I noticed when I was overseas, we would be out and about, and like we would go somewhere like in Germany, and we would see the Americans that are out and about interacting, and it was almost cringy just to listen to them, because it's like you're yelling at this guy who's running his business because he doesn't speak English, and you're mad. You're on his soil,
Right.
and you're mad that he can't accommodate to you.
Right.
And it's just, and there's a sense of entitlement.
Yes, there is.
It just,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
really drives me crazy. And I
Yeah.
mean, even
I no
driving down
longer,
the road.
I don't label things as good or bad anymore. I'm doing my best to strip that language. What I recognize is that in any single moment, we are one person's hero and another person's villain.
Yeah.
We are the bad guy in someone's story and the good guy in someone else's. But there is no such thing as bad or good. At any given moment, we could be being both at the same time, right? And it's just a matter of perspective, and it's a matter of our understanding of our impact and our deep connection to one another. So when we truly recognize that and we eradicate our privilege, we seek to strip away our understanding of what we're owed.
Yeah.
Instead of understanding community and connection, it's a deeper and more interesting connection to the world. Like I said, I don't believe in a sky daddy anymore, but I do believe we're all deeply spiritually connected to one another.
There's a quote I want to read here that I got while doing my research. Present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention. We design our lives and realize the power of accepting ourselves as the author of our story.
Yeah, I wrote that.
That really stood out to me for 2 reasons. First, the intention, because I feel like too many people are, like you said, that sense of entitlement. It's quick to cast blame on someone else, but not necessarily be intentional with our own actions. We tend to blame others for shortcomings and so on and so forth. Exactly. But the part that stood out to me is the author of our story. And I'm actually just got finished teaching emotional intelligence and to some high schoolers.
Yeah.
And I actually I issued them all a little Bic pen, just a pen.
They probably were like, what is this? Just
they were like, is this for taking notes? And I'm like, no, this is a tool right here. This is, you are the author of your story. If someone emotionally hijacks you, you have given them that pen and they are writing your story for you, because they're going to dictate what your outcome is going to be. Hang on to that pen. You are the author of your story. So what is it about that quote right there that you wrote that to you is so powerful?
I think at any given moment, people are constantly trying to, if we're going with your metaphor, trying to snatch that pen from us, and they're trying to write our story. I think the key is in getting clear on who belongs around us, and knowing that we deserve to hold on to our own pen, right? And that we can powerfully hold on to our own pen and we can write our own story. Because for so long, my trauma fought to write my story for me, right? And it still does. On a daily basis, it still does. And I have to just take a breath and grab the pen back, right? And recognize, no, I get to write the story. There are choices that I have, even though I am a woman, right? And I am not, I'm not a white man, so I don't have all of the privilege in the world. But I do have choices I can make. There are things I do have power over, and I'm going to take responsibility for doing the best I can with what resources I have and what power I do have. And I'm going to, connect with the people around me and recognize that we are infinitely powerful together, right?
Yeah.
Infinitely powerful together when we bond together. There's only so much power I have by myself, but in forming community, excessive amounts of power. Right?
Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah, exactly. And we're really beautiful when we lean into that.
Yeah.
So that to me is, not only am I writing my story, but there's other people writing their story alongside me. And our stories may intersect at
Coincide.
places
Yeah.
and they coincide, right? And they may not spend their entire life together. I may not be a person in their story for the rest of their life, but there is a moment of connection. And even if I know someone for 5 minutes,
Mhm.
there's a power in that connection. There's something that's left behind from each of us as an imprint in one another's lives.
What would you say matters most to you in your life at this point?
I would say empowering people to have deep and meaningful conversation, to get curious, to discover what's possible. Because until we get curious, we don't even know it's possible. We really can't write our story truly and authentically if we don't even know what's possible.
Yeah, I think too. It's another interesting thing that I'm always hearing is crucial conversations, having difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Talking to strangers is a great book for
We
that.
can do hard things. We can do hard things.
Yeah, but I mean, even sitting there and me having a conversation with someone and saying, "I want you to understand where I'm coming from."
Yeah.
They've got to be willing to see where I'm coming from, but I also have to be willing to see where they're coming from.
Where
And
they're coming from.
and
Yeah.
I think sports fans to me are the worst, or people who are, I want to talk to you about religion. It's like it's almost like the open-mindedness box is locked, and it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
cool. Hear me. Yeah, I'll
And I don't want to
entertain.
hear you.
Yeah, I'll entertain it. I'll let you
Yeah.
talk. But at the end of the day, you need to understand where I'm coming from. And I think that's
Right.
wrong. And I think that's what a lot of us have to start working towards is,
Yeah.
and I've made a conservative effort myself when I'm
Yeah.
listening to people to say,
Yeah.
I'm that guy on that meme where it's like, change my mind. But
Yeah.
I'm
Me too.
actually willing
Me
to
too.
open to it.
I'm like,
Yeah.
please tell me something I didn't know so I can change my mind. I say this to people all the time. I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah.
When given new information, I reserve the right to change my mind, and I will continue to change my mind for the rest of my life. And there is so much power in that.
Yeah.
So much power in not knowing, because then you're open to discovering, right? When you know you're an expert, and so much has been proven that people who are experts, and Francesca Gino talks about this in Rebel Talent, there's so much that's been proven that when we decide we're an expert, we turn off our ability to learn and understand and truly connect.
Yeah. I'm not the ruler of the world and I'm not perfect.
I
So
don't know shit.
I can,
I've gotten to 38 years old, and what I'm sure of is
yeah.
that there's a hell of a lot I could still learn, and I still wouldn't know a damn thing. I
Yeah.
wouldn't know a damn thing.
What is something that you fear at this point?
I fear stagnation. I fear stagnation. I fear that at some point in time, I will, something I've gotten good at is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I love
But
that quote.
what I'm afraid of is that at some point in time, I will stagnate. I will dig my heels in and decide I'm right, right? And at that point in time, that's a scary moment.
That breeds complacency. Yeah.
Correct. And it also breeds harm.
Yeah.
That would mean I'm eradicating someone else's voice in an
Hmm.
effort to perpetuate my own. And we see that constantly with all kinds of leaders where they dig their heels in and say that they're right, and they've stopped learning because marketing teaches us we've just got to plant our flag and run with it,
Yeah. You're
right?
the leader.
Correct.
Stand
We
your
can't
ground.
change our mind. We exactly right.
Yeah.
And so that I'm deeply afraid of. And part of my own exploration in my own life, like I continually tap into what's possible for myself in an effort to try new things and learn new things and do new things in an effort to consistently stay both the student and the teacher, right? So like I just wrote my first romance novel. I have a pen name, so you my pen name is Maeve Marin, but I just wrote my first romance novel. I didn't even know I was going to write it. I just sat down, and it's not like I had read a ton of romance novels either, but I sat down, I'd read like two, and then I was like, I'm going to write a romance novel, and I did it, and I did it in like 5 weeks, and then I edited it, and now it's published. But
Congrats.
thank you, but going through that process, being that student and learning, right, is something that I deeply value. And so I continue to explore what's possible in my own life so that I'm not just telling other people to do it, I'm doing it too. We
Yeah.
have to make a practice of staying curious and tapping into what's possible, um, so that we can actually be teachers, right? So you're not falling into that expert mode.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. You wrote a romance novel.
Yeah.
The, the one thing that you would like others to remember you for when your life is over and done with.
I would love, I used to pray for this as a kid. This is such a weird thing to have prayed for as a kid, but I'm making it real in life. I used to pray to have the wisdom of Solomon.
Hmm.
And so in my life, I think I just want to be remembered as someone who is wise,
Yeah.
who people could go to for counsel, who people could rely on to be not judgmental, but to be someone who is truly willing to listen and to understand and to see them. My definition of love is to be willing to and committed to seeing someone and not looking away,
Yeah.
right? It's the key is the not looking away part. That doesn't mean they have to stay in close proximity to us, right? It doesn't mean that if they're harming us, we don't have to push them away, but being willing to see someone, to truly see them and
Yeah.
not look away is an exceptionally vulnerable thing.
It was said on a previous episode, learn to be interested versus interesting and
Yeah.
really get to know people deep. Yeah. No, I like that. One more time for anybody out there who wants to learn more about you, the
Yeah.
coaching,
Yeah.
interior
Yeah.
design, you name
Yeah.
it. Where
Yeah.
can they find you?
Yeah. Check out my website. It's concinnate.world. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. There's everything about me as a speaker. There's nothing about my romance novel, but you can always email me and ask about it.
Who are the main characters in the romance novel?
So the book is called Under My Skin. It's on
Okay.
Amazon. It's Under My Skin by Maeve Marin. But it's Ethan and Aria. It's a woman.
Ooh, those are good romance novel names.
Yeah, they
Ethan and
are.
Aria.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because
I
they
don't think Trip is good for a romance novel.
no, actually, I think it probably would be.
Would it?
There's lots of like there. I mean, there's like so as romance authors, I like learned this because I did this intuitively, but I've learned
Yeah.
from other romance authors who I'm now connected to. I'm like, so how do you decide the names of your characters? Because I designed who the characters were and then I named them, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, we just Google sexy names. And I was like, I did too. Okay, great.
Okay. All right.
Google
Yeah.
names based on who a character is and like discover like what fits. But Trip would be a good name.
I had to Google, does Trip come up as a sexy name? I'll have to see if that's one of the
Can't help you out
50.
there. I don't know, but there's a list of like for both femme names and masculine names. There are like a list of 100 of both that is like readily used by authors.
All right. Well, that'll ruin my search history on my phone. But all right. Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This was super cool. It was super cool getting to have this conversation. I like talking to like-minded people.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, it's just so many similarities more. Just got started talking to you. So
Yeah.
definitely
Appreciate
appreciate this. Yeah, and what an extensive book list I have here to add to the website. So
if you ever need more, just reach out. I have a book club too. So
definitely.
we're always reading more.
Perfect. Yeah, you even mentioned C.S. Lewis. I think it's the first time he's been mentioned on here that was not referred to in Narnia series.
No,
so,
he's not. I've never read his fiction. Funny story. I've only
really?
read
Lion Witch in the Wardrobe or
never.
Prince Caspian, none of that?
Never.
Wow.
I've only ever read his nonfiction. His nonfiction is really, really brilliant. He's got a prolific amount of writing. His nonfiction.
Sexy name for your next one, Aslan. Aslan.
Yeah, but people know it's from C.S. Lewis.
Okay, there you go. All right. Well, that will conclude this episode of the Shadows Podcast, folks. Head over to Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Make sure you like, follow, whatever the platform requires you to do. And also leave us a review if you like what you're listening to. It helps with all the algorithms and all that good stuff out there. So if you head over to our website, you can leave a review. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. But that'll conclude this episode of the Shadows Podcast.